Hello and welcome to CYC News for the 28th of June 2020 and the 21st of Bauna 1736 AM. I'm Bishoy Basilius. In today's headlines, North Korea's Kim Jong-un suspends military action against South Korea. EU considers barring Americans from travel list. The US curbs unfair Air India repatriation flights. German outbreak sparks fresh local lockdowns. Top US health official Fauci warns of disturbing new US surge. Does the UK have the pandemic under control? And Major League Baseball to return in July with a shorter 60-game season. And Liverpool have won the 2019-2020 Premier League. But first to North Korea, where the country has suspended plans for military action against South Korea, according to state media. Recent weeks saw a rising tide of angry rhetoric from the North over activists' plans to send leaflets with anti-North Korean messages over the border. Last week, the North blew up the Joint Liaison Office and also threatened to send troops to the border area. But at a meeting chaired by leader Kim Jong-un, state media said the decision was taken to suspend military action. The Central Military Commission made its decision after taking what it called the prevailing situation into consideration. The North also began to dismantle loudspeakers it had set up only last week, traditionally used to blast anti-South Korean messages over the border. The situation represents a notable de-escalation in rhetoric after Mr. Kim's sister, Kim Yo-jong's orders to the army to decisively carry out their next action, in part because of what Pyongyang said was Seoul's failure to stop activists floating balloons into anti-regime leaflets over the border. State news agency KCNA reported that the meeting also discussed documents outlining measures for further bolstering the war deterrent of the country. The North Korean leader's sister, Kim Yo-jong, had instructed the army to come up with a plan with blowing up the liaison office just the first stage, but as leader, Kim Jong-un ultimately gets the final say. Over to Europe now, where EU ambassadors met on Wednesday to plan reopening external borders on the 1st of July, and travellers from the US could be among those not allowed in. A number of European countries are keen to open up to tourists, but others are cautious over the continued spread of coronavirus. The 27-member bloc must first agree with the measures that non-EU countries should meet before deciding on a safe list. The virus is spreading in the US, so it is likely Americans would be barred. Brazil, Russia and other countries with high infection rates would also be left off a safe list, according to reports from Brussels. The EU is not yet thought to have agreed how they will assess which countries meet high health standards, one of the criteria for entry. Part of the problem is assessing reliable health data. Latest figures from the EU's health agency, the European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control, highlight Brazil, Peru, Chile, Panama and Saudi Arabia as countries with the highest case notification rate. Russia and the US have a lower rate of cases per 100,000 inhabitants, but are still higher than most of Europe. The US has seen over 2.3 million infections and over 120,000 deaths, with cases still climbing. Other criteria also being considered are reciprocity and links to the EU. France wants the EU to give access only when it is reciprocated by other countries, while Spain is said to be keen to reopen the border with neighbouring Morocco. The United States has accused India's national carrier of discriminatory practices and curbed repatriation flights it was operating both to and from the country. The US Department of Transportation said Air India was also selling tickets for the flights, which meant they were not true repatriations. It added that US carriers were not being allowed to conduct similar operations to and from India, despite submissions from airline companies. Air India has not responded as yet. A statement on the DOT website said that the carrier would now have to apply for statements of authorization prior to conducting charter flights, and that approval would be given on a case-by-case basis. The statement said Air India is advertising flights that would constitute a rate of 53% of the scheduled services it operated before the onset of the current public health emergency. It added that this was to restore a level playing field for US airlines, and they would reconsider the decision once US airlines were also allowed to operate flights to and from India. The carrier has been flying a series of so-called rescue missions to bring Indian citizens back home from other countries in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. It has already operated a number of flights to and from the US as part of its Vande Bharat mission. Over to Germany now, where authorities in the state of North Rhine-Westphalia have reimposed lockdown restrictions in 2 districts after a spike in cases with more than 500,000 people affected. One area is home to a meat packing plant where more than 1,500 workers have tested positive. State Premier Armand Laschet said the preventative measures in the Gütersloh district would last until June 30. The neighbouring Warendorf district has also seen restrictions return. The state's health minister, Karl-Josef Laumann, announced the second lockdown just hours after the first, saying further measures were needed in order to protect the population. It is the first time lockdowns have been reintroduced in Germany since the country began lifting nationwide restrictions in May. Germany has been praised for its overall response to the pandemic, but there are fears restrictions are rising again. Authorities in North Rhine-Westphalia have been among those strongly pushing Chancellor Angela Merkel to ease national restrictions in recent months. Returning to the United States now, where the country's top infectious disease expert has told lawmakers that the US is seeing a disturbing surge in coronavirus infections in some states. A panel of health officials, including Dr. Anthony Fauci, said the next few days would be crucial to stem the new outbreaks. Cases are climbing rapidly across a number of states. The four top experts also testified they were never told by President Donald Trump to slow down testing. Their comments come after Mr. Trump told a weekend rally in Oklahoma that he had asked his team to do less testing to help keep official case counts down. Dr. Fauci, the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, testified to a congressional committee investigating the US response to the pandemic. He said, "To my knowledge, none of us have ever been told to slow down on testing. In fact, we will be doing more testing." The other three officials, representing the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the Food and Drug Administration, and the Department of Health and Human Services, also disputed Mr. Trump's comment, saying they had never been directed to slow down testing. Brett Giroir, the Health Department Assistant Secretary, who oversees US diagnostic capacity, told lawmakers he expects the US will be able to conduct 40 to 50 million tests per month by autumn. To some health news, and society is reopening. The long national hibernation, to quote UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, is coming to an end, with the biggest lifting of restrictions so far due to take place in England at the start of July. Lockdowns are also being eased in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, albeit at slightly different paces. It is a massive moment and one certainly not without risk. There have been warnings it could lead to a second peak in infections. So how tight a grip does the UK have on coronavirus? Restrictions have to be lifted at some point. The big question is whether the UK is moving too soon. The number of infections has fallen dramatically. On average, there are now just over 1,000 new cases per day. However, the number of infections is still significantly higher than in other countries. There are two factors that determine how quickly the virus could spread: the steps taken to reduce the risk of transmission and the ability of the test and trace system to contain local flare-ups. Professor Lucy Yardley, an expert in public health psychology at the University of Bristol, believes people will be naturally cautious, particularly those at higher risk. An unknown factor in reducing the risk of transmission is how quickly the public will embrace the new freedoms. And in sport, Major League Baseball is set to return in July after the League and Players Association agreed to a shortened 60-game season. Officials say training will begin on the 1st of July, with players tested for coronavirus on arrival, and games are scheduled to start on 23rd or 24th of July. MLB Commissioner Rob Manfred said Major League Baseball is thrilled to announce that the 2020 season is on the horizon. Talks have been ongoing about the league's resumption after the regular 162-game season was postponed in March. The Players Association said all remaining issues have been resolved. The league says the proposed schedule has been designed to mitigate travel with regular health checks in place for players, coaches and support staff. And in the Premier League in the UK, Liverpool have won a first top-flight title since 1990. Liverpool's 30-year wait is finally over after Manchester City lost 2-1 to Chelsea to confirm the Reds as Premier League champions for the first time. Jurgen Klopp's side needed one more victory to seal the league, but City's failure to win means they cannot be caught. It is Liverpool's 19th top-flight title and their first since 1989-1990. And that's all for CYC News. A reminder that you can watch this news bulletin again throughout the week on YouTube. I'm Bishoy Basilius from the CYC studios in Sydney, Australia. See you next time.